As we begin the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, we're going to kind of flip the classroom and I'm going to start with these notes. We're going to start with chapter 1, but because I've already done a close reading analysis with you over chapter 1, I'm going to jump right into the analysis of this chapter. The rest of the chapters I'll probably give you a quick summary of what's going on so that you can remember, and then I'll follow that with analysis notes. And it's those notes that I want you to pay very close attention to. From those notes, that's where I'll get a few of my questions that'll be on my exam. So please make sure that you listen to the clues that I give, if there are things that I repeat or if there are things that I stress as I'm talking, or even if there are things that I say, make sure that you know this because it's on a test. Obviously, you are going to want to take notes over that. And so we'll begin with chapter 1, and I'm going to start with the analysis. As this story opens, we're quickly introduced to this idea of a proper, respectable Victorian attitude, and it comes into play in this first chapter. Stevenson kind of lived by this himself, and he wanted to make sure that he included it within this novel and within this setting. And we see that as Enfield and Utterson are on their typical Sunday walk. Enfield is introduced into the story. He only has a very small part in this chapter, and he pops up again. I think it's in chapter 7. His role, only his role is to introduce the story of Hyde, and so he's not really a character that you're going to have to remember. But as the men are walking and they come upon that one part of the building that's dilapidated, that's in ruins and all of that, it reminds Enfield of a story that he wants to share with Utterson. And as he begins to share that story about Hyde trampling the girl, he realizes that Utterson is somewhat familiar with Hyde. And so once he realizes that, they both decide that they are not going to talk about it any further. And the reason for that is because they have this distaste for sensation and for gossip. And as we see that, one of the very first themes comes to play, and that is the theme of silence. Utterson and Enfield decide that they are going to choose to be silent and no longer converse about the story of Hyde, because they realize that Utterson has this small connection to Hyde. And it's through that theme of silence, and it's through that connection that Utterson knows that focus on reputation pops up, which is another theme. Hyde is connected to Jekyll, and because of that, Hyde, who has this very negative character and this man who is considered evil, Utterson wants to protect Jekyll and the connection that Hyde and Jekyll has, because he doesn't want Hyde discrediting Dr. Jekyll's reputation. Jekyll, if you remember, is a very respectable man. He's in that upper middle class. He is very well liked, and so for him to be associated with Hyde is not a good thing. And it's because of that both Enfield and Utterson believe that blackmail somehow must be a part of the connection between Jekyll and Hyde. And so that's why blackmail is very plausible, because of reputation, and the protection of reputation is so important. Again, that's why when the group forces Hyde to pay money back, he agrees to pay that money back because he wants to preserve his reputation as much as he can. And so Enfield then can see how Hyde might be blackmailing Jekyll, because Hyde uses one of Jekyll's checks, and so that connection to Jekyll then automatically means that Enfield thinks, oh, somehow Hyde must be blackmailing him, because there's no way that Jekyll would have anything to do with a character like Hyde. In the same way, Utterson assumes Hyde is blackmailing Jekyll because Jekyll is this respectable character. Why else would these two men be associated? The reason for that is the Victorian society. Remember, everything is about being respectable and proper. In Victorian society, people are not allowed to associate with those who have a sullied reputation. Just by knowing Hyde and associating with him, Jekyll's reputation is in jeopardy. Continuing on, Utterson's willingness to associate with Jekyll and with Hyde suggests that he is intrigued with the darker side of man. We saw that in our close reading at the very beginning about how Utterson was somewhat envious of those people who do have that other side to them and are able to play into that. And it's this intrigue that leads Utterson to investigate Hyde rather than avoid looking into matters that could be scandalous. And so he doesn't want to avoid that. He's intrigued by this sinful nature of Hyde, and he then determines that he is going to investigate that. The theme of rationalism versus the supernatural is also introduced in chapter 1. And so we see Utterson, who represents the rational side because he's steadfast, he's unimaginative, and he's logical, whereas Hyde represents the supernatural side. He has this sense of metaphysical dread that surrounds him. Hyde is the metaphysical part, Utterson is the rational part. And the author conveys this attitude through Utterson and through Enfield when both discuss their inability to explain why they dislike Hyde. They can't pinpoint what it is that makes Hyde ugly because he doesn't look deformed, but there's just something within him that is evil and it's detestable, and it just kind of makes them sick at their stomach, but they can't exactly explain what it is. And we know once we read the story, it's because of the darkness and the evil that exists within the heart of Hyde. They have limited imaginations, Utterson and Enfield, that won't let them put into words that eerie and inexplicable because the ugliness is metaphysical. It's a part of Hyde's soul and not his body. Continuing on to chapter 2. Really quick, we're going to go over a summary. Utterson goes home. This is after they've been on their walk. Utterson goes home to his study, and he immediately pulls out Jekyll's will that left everything to Hyde if Jekyll dies or disappears. And that is the one phrase that really Utterson has struggled with all along. But being the lawyer of Jekyll, he has to agree to whatever Jekyll says. But it's just something that's bothered him. Not only that if Jekyll dies, but if Jekyll disappears. Utterson then goes and talks to Dr. Lanyon, and it's then that Lanyon admits that he no longer has this relationship with Jekyll. They used to be, all three of them used to be very good friends, but Lanyon admits that he no longer is in that friendship relationship with Jekyll because of a professional dispute. He refuses to explain what the dispute is about, and again that theme of silence comes to bear. Utterson then goes home, and he has this nightmare, and within that nightmare, he's running through the city and kind of in the gutters and the alleys and underneath the city, and it's this connection to the evil that's kind of floating just below the surface. Utterson then awakes the next morning, and he decides that he is going to run into Hyde. He's going to hunt him down. So he goes and he hangs around that rundown building, and lo and behold, Hyde appears. Hyde gives Utterson his address, and Utterson thinks that the only reason why Hyde does that is because he is anticipating Jekyll's death, and therefore he wants Utterson to know where he lives so that he can get what Jekyll is leaving to him in the will. Remember, as you have read, that Utterson really wanted to see Hyde. He forced Hyde to look him into the face, and that's where he's just kind of grossed out by the look that Hyde gives, or the look that Hyde has, but he can't pinpoint what it is. Utterson then, after leaving Hyde, decides that he's going to go visit Jekyll, but Jekyll's not home. Poole, who is Jekyll's butler, he's the one that is at home, and Poole tells Utterson that yes, Hyde does have a key to Jekyll's lab, but also that the servants are told that they must obey Hyde. And so this really kind of frightens Utterson. He doesn't really know what's going on. Utterson can't put into words what makes Hyde so ugly. He even uses the description of Hyde as a I can't say this word, troglodyte, which is a prehistoric man-like creature. Again, that gives that sense of that metaphysical, it lends to that metaphysical versus rational theme, because it's something that he can't put his hands on. He can't put into words what it is that makes him so ugly. By describing Hyde this way, it links the immoral Hyde to the notion of this recidivism. And what that is just a fall from civilization and a regression to more primitive state. Victorian England really, really feared this. Remember, we talked about how during this historical time, England was out and was trying to take the land and take territory from all of these other nations, I guess, that were around them. Africa was one of them. And they were just kind of intrigued by the savages that lived there. But this idea, or this notion of recidivism, was this fear that the savages might swallow up the superior white races. So this kind of was what is in the background of the people during this time, that is connected even within this story. And so there's that link, the immoral Hyde, to that idea of savagery. One thing in the analysis portion, when Utterson does have the dream, here's kind of the three different things that popped up within the dream. And the first is that there's this faceless figure of Hyde, which is symbolic of the secret sins that lurk beneath the surface of respectable London. And so these secret sins is this recurring symbol, which is a motif that you'll see throughout the rest of this novel. Secret sins, hiding it, kind of connected to that theme of silence. Another part of the dream is that Hyde is stalking the city. And then finally, the crimes of Jekyll and Hyde are hidden by the author to add mystery and eeriness, and even that layer of supernatural within the story. Chapter 3, summary, opens up with Jekyll having this party and Utterson is invited. Jekyll and Utterson begin a conversation. Jekyll tells Utterson that he needs to watch out for Hyde, but Jekyll also says that the moment that he chooses, he can be rid of Hyde. So Jekyll does admit that he has this relationship, this association to Hyde, but he does say that he's in control, in complete control, and the moment that he wants to, he can be rid of Hyde. So the analysis that I can talk about with chapter 3 is really just Jekyll's house. This is a really short chapter, and we see Jekyll's house. And we see how the doctor's side, which Utterson and all the guests go in, is very well appointed. It's respectable. You can see the wealth and the comfort. Even on the description of the outside, it's just a beautiful Hyde. The lab side is this sinister and this run-down building. And so that's the door that Hyde goes in, which is the lab side. And without even knowing, without having been inside, people wouldn't know that the two are connected. But they are connected, and this connection is symbolic of the connection that exists between Jekyll and Hyde.